This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Guildford's MP, Angela Richardson. Hello, Angela. Thank you for giving your time for the Guildford Dragon today.
Yes, nice to see you, Martin. Not a problem.
Okay, and so my first question, rather obviously, is about the current financial situation or situation following the mini budget. What's your view of that situation? Can you think of a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who have had a worse start to their appointments?
Well, I think if any Conservative MP told you that they were sleeping like a baby at the moment, I would suggest that it's probably otherwise. I think it's been quite a stressful time over the last week, watching what's been happening with the financial markets and the response to that by the public, because it takes a wee while for these things to sort of trickle through. They don't immediately. The financial markets can seem like a bit of another world if you've not been involved in them, but there's always real world consequences. And I think we saw that increasingly as people started to worry about their mortgage payments. And this was on the back of a mini fiscal event, as it was described, that was designed primarily to give people confidence that they wouldn't have to worry about their energy bills over the winter. You know, it's a very significant package that the government of support that the government has put in place for people. And it's not just people, it's businesses, it's charities, it's hospitals, it's schools. That people were genuinely worried that their bills are going to go up over the next 6 months in a way that they wouldn't be able to cope with. But what we've seen is that the markets have responded to things that were not pre-announced in this mini fiscal event. So there were significant tax cuts announced, and they weren't priced in by the financial market. So it was kept quite sort of close into the Chancellor's team. There were no leaks or anything like that, but it took everybody by surprise. And I think we saw that the markets know how to respond immediately to these things. It's about confidence. But in some ways, this was the fundamental argument that I suppose we as Conservatives were having with each other over the whole of summer in the leadership contest. There wasn't much difference in policies between the two candidates, but on economics and on tax and how you go about it. So it's not the what that's being described, it's the how and the when. I think that's most important, because a lot of the things that have been announced, as a Conservative, I can get behind. I like the idea of growing the economy. I think that's really important. I like the idea of people keeping more of their money that they earn. I like the idea of the state being small and nimble and people being able to make decisions for themselves. But as I say, I like the idea. This is real ideology, Martin. And when ideology meets reality, we get a conflict, and I think that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Okay, but everyone would say, well, it's good to grow the economy, but it's the way it's done, isn't it? And I read an article in the Daily Telegraph, hardly a major critic of the Conservative Party normally, and they said some Conservative backbenchers are furious about the tax measures, arguing that it is toxic and come at a high political cost for very little benefit. And it continues, Tory MPs are threatening to block the abolition of the 45p tax rate as Liz Truss faces a rebellion over the mini budget. Will you be one of the rebels?
So what I would say is I've not been talking to colleagues about what their plans are, because we're in conference season at the moment. I'm very much waiting for a little bit more information, but the information that I would like, and I would like it to come very soon, is the OBR forecast, because it's really important that we see, are we heading in the right direction? What's going to happen to the economy? It was predicted that we were in a technical recession. That's 2 quarters of negative growth. Whereas actually, the figures that came out recently said that the economy had grown by a small amount. Yep. It is very small. So we've got to make sure we have the right information. It's very easy to ask somebody to rebel against something and someone to vote against something, and opposition parties do that all the time. What I've learned in the last nearly 3 years of being in Parliament is that you need to have all the information right up to the very last minute to be able to make that decision on the day. And you have to have engaged as much as possible with ministers. I've been speaking to Treasury ministers in the last couple of days, just to try and put your point of view across and sort of say, the things that you're happy with and not happy with. And that all happens behind the scenes. And I know it would be lovely for newspapers, and it would be very lovely for opposition parties to get us all to say, this is the hill I'm going to die on. Well, I will make sure that I know. It will be very last minute for me to make a decision like that. I need to have all the information, but I do think that needs to come quickly. And it's the supply side of the argument. It's the things that weren't announced in the mini fiscal event on Friday, but that are meant to be announced over the coming weeks. That's the how and the when.
That was a crass error, wasn't it? Not to say how it was going to be paid for, surely. I mean, that's normally the case, isn't it? But chancellors normally do that in their statements.
Yes, so I understand that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor felt it was very necessary to give people certainty for the coming winter on their energy bills, and that had all been pre-announced, and so had some of her economic policies, like reversing national insurance. But some of these other things weren't. And you have to, we're the party of sound money, the Conservatives. That is something that I want to hold on to. It's something that I believe in, that we should be fiscally responsible. We also need to have credibility. That really matters. And we need to have the confidence of the markets. Okay. By announcing one half and not the other, we have we've shocked the financial markets. And,
exactly.
We talk about the fact that we have had two global shocks with the pandemic and with the war in Ukraine. Right now, what people need is security, stability, and confidence. So it's not just the markets, individuals need that. They need to know how to plan and prepare.
Absolutely, but I didn't hear anyone arguing strongly, at least, against the measures to keep the energy prices down. I think the government was probably widely supported on that across the political spectrum. But I don't understand, and it'd be interesting to know what your mailbag is saying about the tax changes. They're not necessarily connected, are they?
So my mailbag's interesting. I've had a few emails in to do with economic policy. The vast majority of my emails at the moment are a campaign that has been set up to protect nature. So that's what constituents in Guildford are mostly worried about. My okay. Mailbag, I've had hundreds and hundreds of campaign emails about protecting the environment and nature. So that's where it's at. But I have had, probably a dozen emails in with people who are concerned about the economy. And I tell you what's interesting, Martin, they're not concerned for themselves. There are lots of people in Guildford who can weather the storm. But they are concerned for other people. I think that is the hallmark of Guildfordians, that they genuinely, deeply care about others, even if it doesn't impact them severely in their own pocket.
Well, that's very interesting. Only a dozen emails, you say, about the financial situation.
Yes, because I think people are waiting to see what happens. And this is what I'm saying. It takes time for it to trickle down from the financial markets into the newspapers, and the newspapers having an opinion. And it depends what newspaper you read. I read about 6 newspapers every day, and they're across a really broad range of political opinions. I also read the comments under these articles because I want to see what people think. So I have to act in the interest of Guildfordians, but I also have to act in the national interest. And that's where my thinking is at the moment.
Okay, but the polls at the moment have reacted, and they're showing over 30-point lead for the Labour Party at the moment. Now, that might settle down as things generally settle down, but it must make you worry about keeping your seat at the next general election here in Guildford.
Well, I think I've always treated this seat as being marginal. It's marginal since 2019. It won't change the way that I have always engaged and will engage with the people of Guildford and represent them and work on their behalf, with the issues that they bring to me on a day-to-day basis. None of that will change. I think I'm less worried about whether I hold my seat or not, I'm more worried about making sure that we do the right thing by the people of this country, that we protect them from economic shocks, that we make good decisions, and that we communicate those decisions properly, because the error in the last week has been on communicating what we're doing. And I think, if I'm speaking frankly to government, it would be to say that some of the things that they have brought forward, I don't believe it's the right time to do that. The priority at the moment is to tackle inflation and to try and bring that down, so that people feel that they're better off, that they have more money in their pockets to spend. What we're at risk of at the moment is inflation being entrenched for a very long period of time. Now, it's happening across the world. People like to make global comparisons when it suits them, and they don't like to make them when it doesn't suit them. I think we're dealing with a slightly different issue here in the UK than perhaps some other countries are. You've got to be careful not to compare apples with pears, but dealing with inflation is the number one thing, and it is up to the Bank of England as to what measures they take. They started with QT, or quantitative tightening, by selling off short-term bonds. But as we saw a real pressure on, the 30-year gilts and the interest rates or the yields going up on them, that was putting our pension funds at risk.
Yeah.
And, those pension funds are important, and they need to do well in order for people who have those pension funds to be able to have confidence as well.
But
so
if they have to increase interest rates to protect the pound, say, which might seem likely, a lot of people will pay a penalty for that, won't they? I mean, a lot of the younger people who we obviously, as the older generation cares about, because we want our children and our grandchildren to be able to afford to live properly. So it's not an easy equation, is it?
It's not an easy equation, and I think interest rates were potentially always going to have to go up, and that we are at the end of a period of being able to borrow very cheaply. And we've been able to do that for a long period of time. It hasn't necessarily made a difference in terms of being able to grow the economy, also to have a high-wage, high-skilled economy. So I think we're getting to the end of an era in terms of cheap borrowing, and we have to be able to adjust. But the Bank of England... What the Bank of England have done is they have bought the government time by buying back or doing quantitative easing, almost the opposite of what they were doing with the 30-year gilts. They have bought the government time, but they will potentially have to unwind that position. And I don't know what's going to happen at that point, and whether the government will have brought forward all the information that the markets will need to have confidence. Now, that then ties into young people being able to get onto the housing ladder, to be able to afford mortgage payments, and indeed rent, if they're renting, because a lot of people who rent their properties out will have a mortgage, and they'll be impacted, and they'll have to pass that on.
But it's going to be little consolation to someone who's struggling to pay their mortgage to know that the 45p tax rate has gone, or the limit on banker salaries has gone as well, won't it?
So
I find it hard to understand why that should be the case when they can't.
I fundamentally agree with my colleagues who have come out and said that you can't be cutting the top rate of tax. And the banker's bonus as well, we could talk at length about those and what they really achieve and what they don't achieve. But politically, it's not the right thing to do that if at the same time people are worried that their benefits may be frozen and not increased in line with inflation. I think this is about fairness at the end of the day. And I don't know if you saw Michael Gove this morning on Laura Kuenssberg's
No, I
program.
haven't seen.
Well, I tell you what, it's fascinating to watch, because what he talks about is values. We are a very broad church in the Conservative Party. And I think what's happening at the moment and what we're seeing in terms of what I'd call political ideology is just how broad the Conservative Party is. And this is about values and whether you believe that that is the right thing to do. And this is what I'm saying, is that when you take ideology and it meets the reality of where people are, there is a conflict, and we have to resolve that. And my job as the Conservative Member of Parliament for Guildford is to feed back everything that I believe also what constituents are telling me. And I really would encourage them to write in and tell me what they're thinking, because I am listening, and feed that back to government. Now, but government has got to be listening. And my biggest concern at the moment is there doesn't seem to be any sign at all of listening.
Okay, well, that's a good point to end that particular subject on. Thank you, Angela. And what I'd like to move on to now is the original reason I requested this interview, as you know, on the planning issues, especially as they affect Guildford at the moment. So obviously the general policy on planning is set by the government, and that government has been in control of your party for some time now. And it's when I spoke to you in the 2019 general election, you said that you supported the local plan for Guildford with its housing target of 654 houses per annum. Is that still your position?
Well, the local plan is probably one of the most controversial political issues at local government level. Whether it impacts on how people feel about national politics is another thing aside. But at the moment, we have a council that's not Conservative run, but is deciding that they're not going to review the local plan. So they believed that there were reasons that you could review the local plan in terms of census data. Mm-hmm. But people have written into me to ask me, what can I do to sort of make local government review the local plan? And the answer back from ministers has been very clear that that decision taking rests with the council political leadership, and it is entirely within their gift to launch a review of the local plan. What's been happening with housing policy over the last couple of years is we've seen quite a lot of change, quite a lot of political change, because we've had different secretaries of state in the department. So under Robert Jenrick, there was talk of growth zones, and we didn't know whether Guildford would be impacted by that. Under Michael Gove, I think we saw a bit of a rollback on some of those housing targets, the numbers, and a delay in the legislation that was coming forward. And then we saw a change in the name of the legislation. We now have a new Secretary of State, and it appears to me that they're going for economic growth zones around the country, where they'll be trying to speed up planning process to get more homes built. Surrey is not in the list of those economic growth zones that came out in the growth plan last Friday. So at the moment, one of the reasons that the local plan needs to be looked at again is the fact that we haven't been able to deliver transport infrastructure or road infrastructure, and that was one of the key things. We have a local plan, but not many of the strategic sites are underway. Mm-hmm. We have a town centre master plan where we have the North Street development, and I went and had a look at that on Friday morning and went through with the development company exactly what their proposals were and asked them lots of questions about how they were going to do X, Y, and Z to deliver what people in Guildford want, and raise the concern about the height of the very tallest building, because I think that's the number one issue of objection to that particular site. But I think, can I just say, with the North Street development, I think we've come a long way in the last couple of years of where that project started and what it looked like to start with, and the number of properties that they wanted to put in and where it is now. But I still think there is some way to go. Okay. And can I just say, I would encourage residents to actually take part in the consultation process. Now is the right time. It's a couple of months until it comes to planning, and it's really important they do it now, because what happens sometimes is people don't realise the impact until we're a long way down the process and it's too late to register their support or objections. So it's really important they go and have a look at the model, they engage with it, and whether they think it's the right thing for Guildford. But I think it's right to develop a brownfield site that's just looked not that lovely for a long time, to have it close to existing infrastructure. And I met with UK Power Networks on Friday also, to make sure that we are able to deliver energy for everything that's planned for Guildford in the coming years when it comes to development.
Okay, if I may interrupt you there, before, so on the North Street development, there was an early consultation and people were presented with 3 different options, I seem to recall. And the one that was most popular was the traditional appearance. There's very little sign of traditional styling in the current plan, proposal. And I don't know personally how you can get traditional styling with those heights of building. And do you accept that there's a direct connection between the height policy and the value of the site, and therefore the viability argument that pertains, i.e., that the project has to deliver a certain value because of the site value?
Yes, and it's one of the questions that I asked them. I said, you know, if you have to negotiate down on the height, what goes, you know, what's taken away in terms of, say, Section 106 agreements, public realm development, just all those things that they sort of add in, the bus station, you know, because this is where I think this is where the tension lies in development, is if you can't deliver it as it is, having made a lot of concessions already in terms of the number of units, what do we miss out on in Guildford? So I do accept that there is a direct correlation between those 2 things. I think it's always ever been thus.
Yes, and if there was a height limit, then the value of the site would go down, wouldn't it? And therefore smaller developments would become viable.
I think it would be a case that the price would go up. We would see an increase in the what they would go for on the market, these properties.
Well, individual unit pricing.
So what ends up is people continually keep being priced out. So you know that the prices and affordability is a huge issue in Guildford. And this is why it's really important to me that the council isn't just focusing on its town centre master plan and that development, but they're also looking at some of the other strategic sites like Blackwell Farm, so that we can get a range of accommodation for key workers, and bring in the infrastructure that we need there as well. This is all a big jigsaw puzzle. You can't do things in isolation, Martin. You know, the Wayside Urban Development project brings on a new sewage treatment, which we need. We need to, that bit of infrastructure, water infrastructure, is one of the key things that we need Thames Water to deliver for us. No strategic site sits in isolation. They all link to each other. They all bring different things. And we do need to do these developments in order that we protect and preserve and grow our local economy.
Okay, so what about Wisley then? Because a lot of the criticism or the concern about Wisley is that it's detached from, you know, it will require a lot of vehicle movement because people will not do and won't be by a town. What's your view on the Wisley site?
So I'm careful about talking about Wisley because it doesn't sit in my constituency, it sits next door. And so Paul Beresford has been leading on Wisley. And Wisley is, as I've said to you before I was elected, it's a brownfield site, which makes it ideal for development. But I always think that the most important thing is that you are close to existing infrastructure, or that infrastructure, there is a plan for it. It should come first, in my view. Infrastructure should be put in before the dwellings. And we need to think about how everything's connected: road, active travel, you know, cycleways, etc., so that people can get around.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time, so forgive me for interrupting you there. But I just want to ask you that isn't there going to be an inexorable demand for more houses all the time the population goes up? And the main driver for population increase in this country is immigration. And yet we hear that the government wants to relax controls on immigration. What's your view on that?
So I don't support illegal immigration. And we really need to tackle that. But I believe, so this is one of the supply side reforms that is being discussed at the moment. I believe that the only way that we can have the skills that we need to grow the economy is if we import quite a lot of them. We have 5 million inactive people who aren't employed at the moment, so they're inactive. The government would like, a lot of those people to go back into the workforce. That's going to take time. We'd like to upskill those people. That's going to take time as well. It's not going to fix the issues that we face in the economy to be able to grow it to 2.5% in the time frame. So there will be sector specific immigration that we need in order to meet the demands that we have.
Okay,
so there's huge demands in the economy, and it's the supply side that we need to bring forward. And when I voted for Brexit, it was about controlling borders. It was about us making our decisions. It wasn't about stopping immigration. And as you know, Martin, I'm an immigrant. I'm a proud immigrant. And I want to be able to make my contribution to this country. I don't believe in stopping immigration. I believe that it's part of the parcel. But you are right to link immigration to housing need, which is why these investment zones are really important. And that we can, I suppose the word is, free up some of the red tape that stops us from being able to do things to grow the economy.
Okay, I don't think anyone, I haven't heard anyone seriously say we should stop immigration full stop. I mean, that wouldn't even be possible. But but if we look at growth, it's inevitable that if we have a higher population, the GDP will increase. The size of the cake will increase. But what's important to people really is their size of the slice. And there's no guarantee that by having a bigger cake, individuals have a bigger piece, is there?
I think it's about all boats rising with the tide. That is the philosophy. I think you have to always make sure when you're doing that, though, that those who need the most support have the most help and that it's targeted. At the moment, we've done something. With the energy price freeze, that's gone out blanket everywhere. I would have much preferred that to have been a little bit more targeted and supported. It's what I argued for, over the summer. But I fundamentally agree with growing the economy, increasing the size of the cake, and making people feel like they're better off to improve their lives. I just think we've got very strong headwinds at the moment, and it's why I'd like to have realistic ideas put forward that will help people. It might be that we've got to all be in it together. Things have got to be fair. It's going to be a really tough winter. We are going to have to tighten our belts. Things are going to be tough, but we shouldn't do things that make it even harder for everybody. We've got to do things to support people.
Angela Richardson, Guildford's MP, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.